Education is preparation for reparations.
Very powerful ending. You cannot steal what is yours. Thank you, Peter, Herbert, for that opening contribution. We're now going to move swiftly on to hear from Professor Kwame Akuffo, OBE, and he is an Emeritus Professor of International and Comparative Law at the University of West London. Thank you, Professor.
Chair, with your permission, I'll remain seated if I could, because I had a stroke 3 years ago and I've left a bit paralyzed, or rather paralyzed and also blind. So I shall make my contribution from it. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Thank you all very much for being here and for the opportunity for us to make these contributions. But before I make my preliminary observations, I'm reminded of a statement made by a well-known legal historian called Maitland and his colleague, that such is the unity of all of history that anyone who tries to tell a bit of it must feel that his very first words tear a seamless web. Now, this web connects all of us in the most intimate way. And if I may start with a personal story, one of my favorite calypsonians is David Rudder, and in one of David Rudder's songs, he talks about Europe making us basa basa. Now, if you don't know what the word basa basa means, alliterative nature alone tells you that it's not something that's good. Basa basa is just you're messed up, bad. So that's what Europe has done to us. And my personal story, which I only discovered recently, is this, that my great-grandmother, the mother of my father's mother, was an enslaved woman from Antigua, who left Antigua to travel back to Africa with her brother in the 1850s and so on. Now, I always knew that I loved Calypso, but I didn't know that it was also in the blood. So it's all very complicated, and we're all connected to this global history, at the center of which are these dominant powers, and we, unfortunately, for centuries have been the objects, not the subjects, the objects. Now, before I make my substantive contribution, can I just start by saying that if we're here to look at the relationship between law and reparative justice, but can I warn that law is such a limited instrument, it is a potent instrument, but at the same time it has severe limitations because of its nature. And it would be helpful if that is the instrumentality that we're going to rely on. We must be aware of some of these limitations. I mean, we heard some from the conversation with Jackie this morning. But for example, there are arguments over whether or not time has run us out, whether or not limitations, statutes, and so on apply in relation to side claims that may come under reparative justice. Also, there are issues over who have the legal capacity to bring these claims, who are the defendants, and who pays at the end the bill and all these things. So I think it is important from the outset to understand that law lives in society and therefore is best understood in the more complex context of the wider politics, economics, psychology, sociology of, if you like, life generally. It's only when you view law in that broader context that law makes sense. So in our conversation around reparative justice, it's important to locate the conversation within these broader realities and so on. And my second broad observation relates to human rights. I think it's clear that the conversation around reparative justice has got to be based on the law that today we recognize as human rights law for a number of good reasons. Firstly, that human rights law represents the highest juridical form, the highest form of law in our contemporary world. I'm reminded of a book written by Costas Douzinas, in which he acknowledges that a new ideology has triumphed on the world stage, the ideology we call human rights. But it is contradicted by the fact that at the same time that it has triumphed, we're also witnessing some of the worst abuses of human rights that we've known in our history. And generally, people accept that the enslavement of our peoples constituted the worst kind of human rights abuse that there is. Now, the reason why, for me, human rights is such a potent legal framework to use for any analysis of slavery and enslavement and so on, is the fact that it's based on the idea of natural justice. Natural justice in the sense that human rights come from a place where, and you may be reminded of the historic constitutions, including the American Declaration of Independence. It said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all human beings are created equal and that they're endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. And included in these rights are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, if you accept that these are inalienable rights, it means that human rights come from a place where you have your rights not given to you by the state. There are rights that inhere in you simply by virtue of your nature as a human being. Now, within the context of human rights, therefore, any violation in the form of reducing a human being to a commodity and then assaulting them and selling them and making them work for nothing constitutes a basic violation of this inalienable right that we have to freedom, to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And also the United Nations always frame the reparative justice conversation within the framework of human rights. It also has the advantage of getting over some of the petty legal issues such as time limits and whether or not we are out of time, because human rights wouldn't have any, because it leans towards equity. There is no time limit in statutory terms, so we can pursue our claims on the basis of what we call in this country jurisprudence equity. The only time limit in equity is that delay defeats equity, and that depends on all the circumstances. So we can use it as a powerful tool to counter any of the bourgeois legal arguments that are often placed in the way of the reparative justice argument. But in substance, in terms of the legal strategies, I'm very fortunate to have recently come back from Ghana, my ancestral home. And the thing that struck me most was the sheer poverty and hopelessness of many of the people who live in that country. And there's absolutely no reason for it. Ghana is a very, very rich country. Apart from South Africa, Ghana is the biggest exporter of gold, the whole of the continent. Indeed, as you know, it used to be called the Gold Coast, and not for nothing, that eponymous name. It also has manganese, bauxite, you name it. But unfortunately, I had the misfortune of witnessing a group of fishermen around Tema coming back from fishing or trying to fish. They went to sea at 2 o'clock in the morning in the canoes. You know, the Atlantic is a very violent sea. And when they came back, they had no fish at all, nothing, I mean nothing. They had carrier bag, plastic bag, which they fished from the sea, and nothing. And they were complaining, how do we feed our families? How do we feed ourselves? Because the government apparently has cut a deal with some Chinese firm or some Chinese to fish the whole of the Gulf of Guinea, all the way to Senegal. So people have what should be our natural resources, the things that is ours by right, by any means, whether international law or custom, whatever it is. People can no longer eat. So the questions that we're facing here are existential, they're real. People are hungry. And you know what happens when people get very hungry? They also get very angry. I always complain that Ghanaians are too laid back, they don't get angry enough. But I'm told that last week they actually got so angry, they marched all the way to the president's house and so on. So the conversations that we're having are real, they're meaningful, they make a difference in the lives of people. And that is why we must look at, as I said at the beginning, at the broader context of our conversation. The international institutions are particularly important in terms of developing our societies, our economies, and the rest of them. Ghana is so rich in herbal medicine. I only discovered recently. Our herbalists in Ghana, this is heritage medicine. They are so powerful. I personally know at least 2 people who have been cured of their cancers. They can do amazing things, but because we don't control our economy and so on, we're not able to project these and sell them, license them, and take advantage in order to benefit our own people. I know that I've overextended my time. I'm sorry about that, but I will join in the conversation when Jackie and the others have had a chance to do further work on these preliminary observations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Akuffo. And really, again, highlighting how law continues to still legitimize accumulation by dispossession. It's not just what happened in terms of chattel enslavement. Those institutions, those structures are still there.
Education is preparation for reparations.